Hi, I'm Brock Dickinson, and I'm coming to you today from Waterloo, Canada, center of Canada's technology industry. I'm here on the campus of the University of Waterloo, and this is part of a series where I'm looking at the future of Canada's economy. What is next for Canada? And the topic I want to focus in on today is artificial intelligence, and thinking through some of the implications that AI has for Canada. Now, Canada's actually in a pretty good position when it comes to AI. In 2017, we were the first country in the world to adopt an official AI strategy. And over the last 8 or 9 years, that strategy has paid off pretty substantially. We have more than 670 AI startups in Canada, including 30 generative AI startups. Those companies generate more than $4 billion a year in revenues and employ hundreds of Canadians at this point. And if we look forward just 4 years in time, looking out to 2028, we can see that the impact of the AI industry is going to grow pretty dramatically. We will by that time have 16,000 jobs in the AI sector, and it will contribute more than $16.5 billion a year to the Canadian economy. So some pretty substantial opportunities there. And one of the reasons that we have these opportunities is that we have done so well given that early start in AI. In a recent ranking of countries around the world that are doing well in the AI space, Canada came in at number 4, in large part because of the significant number of universities and research institutes that are doing work in this space, including the one behind me, the Institute for Quantum Computing here at the University of Waterloo. But we have more than 120 of these institutions across Canada, and they're playing a significant role in laying the groundwork for a new sector of the Canadian economy. And I think it's important to think about this as a sector. We often get hung up in the AI conversation on the latest app or widget or tool that we may be able to use that's based on some sort of AI technology. And that shifts our attention away from the real implications of what AI means for Canada and for the broader global economy, where the focus is not on individual tools, but on the notion that AI becomes something ubiquitous that transforms all aspects of the economy. So it's not about the fact that you can access ChatGPT, it's about the way that AI transforms entire sectors of the economy and allows us to think about new growth patterns and new growth pathways for a whole range of industries, from cybersecurity to transportation logistics to healthcare to medical research and on and on. And these are the areas where AI is really going to start to unlock some pretty significant opportunities for Canada. Now, when it comes to sort of putting policy in place to deal with this, there are some things that we can be doing at the policy level that are fairly simple. There are things like the notion that our copyright laws are often restrictive or prohibitive when it comes to supporting the development of large language models with AI. And that's an easy fix. We could do things, we could collaborate with the artistic community to kind of come up with new ways of remunerating creative output and of protecting copyright while still allowing it to be a foundational piece for some kinds of AI development. That's a simple legislative fix that we could probably put in place fairly quickly. Another simple fix relates to the way in which we could adapt our cybersecurity industry to think more about AI. We already have some incredible players in the cybersecurity space, including unicorns like Arctic Wolf, which emerged from the University of Waterloo here. But as those cybersecurity companies grow, AI will be an increasingly important part of the toolkit that they'll have to both bring to bear on cybersecurity issues, but also be able to defend against on the cybersecurity front. And I think there's a number of things that we could be doing at the policy level around cybersecurity, including ensuring that we're putting some pretty clear guidelines into international trade discussions. So as we renegotiate USMCA, for example, or CUSMA as we call it here in Canada, there's a notion that cybersecurity guidelines could be a part of that renegotiation to ensure that we protect our opportunities to grow that aspect of the domestic cybersecurity industry. But perhaps the biggest implication when it comes to the economy and artificial intelligence does not come in the context of these sort of minor policy changes, but really comes in the way we understand Canada's energy opportunities. Now, I'm going to do a whole separate video on where energy goes next in the Canadian economy, but it's important to recognize that the AI sector is intrinsically connected to and tied to the energy sector. Why? Because AI, in its development and in its implementation, innovation requires absolutely massive quantities of energy. And therefore, the key players, the most successful players in AI development, will also be the most successful players in energy development. And part of that is traditional oil and gas, part of that is alternative energies, wind and solar and tidal and geothermal, and part of that relates to the development of the nuclear sector. And in fact, in order to meet the demands of AI, we really need to be developing energy capacity on all of those fronts. And there's some interesting implications to this that I think we haven't entirely thought through. As AI consumes these massive amounts of energy, it shifts the patterns of energy consumption within our country and around the world, and it suggests that some of our historic efforts to address things like climate change through emissions reduction may not be where we're headed in the longer term. That as we look at the performance of companies like Google and Microsoft, who had set very aggressive climate reduction targets and emissions targets for their companies as part of their corporate policy, we've seen that AI has in fact led them to blow past those targets in some pretty substantial ways. It's unlikely that the carbon emission targets and the other greenhouse gas emission targets that we have set in the context of the early 2000s or the 2010s are going to make a lot of sense in the context of AI development. And so as we recognize that the energy increases are likely to increase, that means that we're also likely to have larger carbon footprints around some of these industries begin to emerge. So that's not a suggestion that we need to avoid these industries, but it does tell us something else about where the Canadian economy goes next. Because if energy consumption drives increased carbon emissions, then we're going to have to think increasingly about things like carbon capture and carbon sequestration as key components of the next Canadian economy. And all of this flows out of the notion that AI is going to power significant parts of Canada's growth. So as we think through the implications of this, we recognize that this isn't just computer scientists sitting in a laboratory somewhere, but our ability to kind of excel in this space includes the notion that we're going to drive massive growth in the energy sector, and we're going to try to offset that growth through tactics like sequestration and capture, and that this is going to be sort of a major component of the economy moving forward. And often when we talk about AI, we don't think of it in that context. We think of those widgets and those gizmos and those gadgets and things that we're using individual applications for. In fact, we need to be thinking of AI as something much more ubiquitous, something more omnipresent, in the same way that electricity transformed the impacts of the Industrial Revolution. As we think about the way that AI is going to transform every aspect of our economy, it changes the rules of how we do things and what we need to be building when it comes to local economies. Now, some of those changes are even physical. The actual nature of the built environment changes with AI. The kinds of industrial facilities that we need will be different under an AI regime than it is under the current sort of advanced manufacturing focused regime that our economy is experiencing. And that plays out in some really interesting ways as well. I've been doing some work recently with a community in New Brunswick that has attracted a fairly large manufacturing facility from an American manufacturer. That facility is more than 65,000 square feet, but it is powered by AI. It is essentially a dark facility in which human employees are not needed. And so that 65,000 square foot facility opened on day one with 6 employees. And there's this tension that now exists at the center of what we do in economic development because of the way AI is changing the economy. Traditionally, when we looked for investments, notions that large facilities brought lots of taxes and lots of sort of benefits to local government were compatible with the idea that they brought lots of jobs and lots of employments, which fed income taxes for senior levels of government and created lots of economic activity at the local level. In the age of AI, jobs and tax revenues are divorced from each other. They may or may not be related. And so it's quite possible to get a 65,000 square foot facility, which does wonders for a municipality's bottom line in terms of the amount of taxes they're going to earn, but does nothing from a job creation perspective to strengthen the local economy or to create new jobs. And so, as the Macdonald-Laurier Institute has suggested recently, one of the key things we're going to need to wrestle with in the economic development space moving forward is this disconnect between our existing economic incentive policy and the kinds of things that we're going to want to try to achieve when AI becomes ubiquitous. Are we seeking to generate larger tax revenues for government through investment, or are we actually seeking to create jobs of some sort? Historically, we could do both. In the future, we may have to choose one or the other, and making sure we understand the implications of that and how it drives local economies now is going to be critical for ensuring that our communities are in the right space moving forward. But in the midst of all of this, as we think about what AI means for the next Canadian economy, it's important to remember that it is this force that's going to transform every aspect of that economy. So we're in a great position to thrive and do well with an AI-driven set of opportunities in Canada, but it's going to change the rules of virtually every other industry in the country.